Thank you for joining us for this Ask Alumni live careers conversation, Job Seeking in 2020. This is the first in a series of live streamed events planned for this year to provide the alumni community insightful career advice and resources, especially in these challenging times. My name is Margaret Quixley and I'm the chair of the University of Melbourne Alumni Council. I graduated from the University of Melbourne with a Masters in International Relations in 2013, and I'm currently employed as the Campaigns Director with the Alliance for Gambling Reform. Before we continue, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners on the land on which I am today, the Wurundjeri, as well as the traditional owners of the land you are all situated on, and acknowledge that Indigenous Australians have been the custodians of the lands and waterways of Australia for thousands of years. I pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging. Our event tonight is developed to assist recent graduates who are establishing their careers. Whether you're taking your first career steps or looking for a change, we hope you will find this session useful. We will endeavour to explore how to adapt to changing circumstances and set yourself up for success, with top tips for job seeking during difficult times from the perspective of recruiters and fellow alumni who started their career during the 2008 global financial crisis. I'm joined online today by Addie Chipper, who graduated with a Bachelor of Commerce Honours in 2008, entering the workforce as the world was in the grips of the global financial crisis, and has gone on to forge a successful career in investment banking, leading to his current role at Deutsche Bank. Also online is Shirley Gu, who graduated with a Bachelor of Commerce Honours in 2008 and then a Graduate Certificate in Management in 2013. After getting a taste of work as an intern with the Bank of China and Standard Chartered Bank, Shirley worked for 4 years at ANZ before co-founding career coaching company Careerists. For the past 4 years, she has been CEO of Infinity Coaching Institute. Finally, we have James Sycamore from Randstad, who is here to offer valuable insights from a recruitment perspective. James has been in the recruitment industry for more than 15 years in various roles, with the majority of his experience being a specialist recruitment consultant in education, HR, banking and finance, and information technology. He has supported a large number of people over the years in securing their ideal roles at all experience levels, from graduates through to senior level executives. We've had some questions submitted in advance and we'll try and cover them during our discussion, but please also feel free to pose questions of your own through the Q&A window, and we'll set aside some time at the end to answer these questions. Thank you for joining us today, Addie, Shirley and James.
Very much.
Welcome everyone.
Thank you.
I might start with you, Addie. You joined the workforce at a particularly challenging time, but perhaps you can start us off by reflecting on some of your experience and some of the challenges you faced in 2008.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Margaret. I think it's good to reflect on, why we're going for the roles that we are, and also the needs of the businesses at the same time. So, I remember I got this advice when I started as a graduate, to always remember that you are ultimately part of a business, and what that means is your role also has to advocate for the business and also need to be aligned to the needs of the business. So in 2007, 2008, I got a role at Goldman Sachs in their middle office, and my role was basically created to save the business money, because they were spending a lot of money on external consultants. They wanted someone internal, and what I did, recognizing that, what I did for the business with me and my boss is we found a way for the bank to actually save a lot of money on their tax bill in terms of how they write particular revenue. So we were very conscious that our jobs are there to actually create efficiencies within the bank. At the same time, my graduate job was with PwC in their M&A team, and we were all told that you're going to be moved back 4 months. So effectively, you won't have a role for 4 months. Your graduate date is delayed. That's obviously creates anxiety, creates uncertainty, and and my thought process at the time was, well, what's happened has happened. I've got to think about how can I be productive in this time. So I asked my employer at the time, can you support me in starting my CFA? Now that situation is going to be different for everyone, but I think that the thinking there is during this time when, you know, some people may have lost their jobs or some people are seeking jobs, what are the needs of the businesses that you are trying to get a job at? And also, how can you be productive for yourself in this time to help to improve you as a candidate for employment?
Yeah, that you've raised some really interesting points, Addie, particularly around how do people use the time in between when they're grad role is starting or when they're in the search. I know, Shirley, you had some interesting experiences in your journey to joining ANZ. Perhaps you can reflect on them here.
Yeah, thanks for asking the question, Margaret. So I graduated in 2008, the same year as Addie. So it was really tough market for all the commerce graduates. So after I have completed my honors degree and I received my PR, and I thought with 2 internship experiences in banking back in China, I should be able to getting a job over the next 3 to 6 months time, as most of my friends did, but which graduated the year before I did, but it wasn't a smooth ride. So the first time when I applied for grad programs, I applied for about 35 of them, and I reached the final round of the grad program interview with ANZ, institutional banking, but I didn't get it the first time because I wasn't very well prepared. And I can still remember when they asked me the question, why did you want to work for institutional banking as a grad? I was like telling them a pretty blunt truth that I was allocated to that stream because I picked no preference when I filled in my online application form. So there was like a big mistake that I made and didn't foresee that question coming. So they look at me by asking like, oh, okay, so Shirley, do you know what we do here in institutional banking? I'm like, oh yeah, I looked at your website last night. Apparently I didn't really show much motivation to work in that stream. And when the HR manager gave me feedback, they mentioned 3 things. On top of lack of motivation for Insto, they find I was lack of local work experience because all my experiences were overseas, and I didn't perform very well during the group interview because I was pretty nervous as the only international students which speaks English as a second language in that interview room. So based on the 3 feedback, I really worked on my areas for improvements for the next 12 months by working as a tutor in accounting finance so that I can improve my public speaking. And I also find a job in a local accounting firm just to get more work experience. And towards the end of the year, I joined a volunteering program in a rural primary school in China after the huge earthquake in Sichuan province. So I can get more life experiences and be more adaptive, and also just to enrich my life so that I'm not so academic driven as I used to be. And I can still remember the second time when I applied for the grad program in ANZ, I picked institutional banking specifically because I want to make sure that I can succeed where I failed last year. And they asked me the question, which I didn't quite prepare for. So Shirley, could you tell us about your biggest failure of the last 5 years? I'm like, you know what, I was in this interview room 12 months ago and got rejected by you guys. And that was my biggest failure because for me, like up until the point that I graduated, my life in Australia was pretty much a smooth ride when it comes to study. And I didn't realize there are so many things that I was in short of, such as understanding the local Australian culture and get more experiences. That's why it took me 12 months to get myself ready. And I think I'm ready this time. And I was lucky that I got into my dream job as the only Chinese international student that year. And I think those 12 months also taught me how to be resilient and how to take on constructive feedback. And also learned there is no failure, only feedback. And every time you fail, you understand where you can improve, and that's actually a great life lesson. And when I look back on those 12 months that I got so many rejections and have to work really hard on some of my blind spots, I realized that it's actually a blessing in disguise, because now I'm actually building a company to help more international students and migrants with getting their first job in Australia. So yeah, that's about me.
Some really important reflections there, Shirley, and particularly I just want to drill down into that year that you had and some of the soft skills and the ways that you not only responded to the challenge but also forged new skills and experience that really enhanced your application next time around. James, perhaps you could help us outline some of the skills and experience that job seekers should really be focusing on, and particularly reflecting on, you know, the market that that Addie and Shirley graduated into in 2008 is not dissimilar to what we expect the market to be now and in the coming years.
Yeah, thank you, and thanks for having us. Regards to that, I think Shirley made some excellent points around that resilience piece. I think learning from your mistakes, as you say, it's only ever a learning opportunity rather than a mistake or an error. So that's what we find at the moment, is that persistence really stands out. Transferable skills is another aspect that I would say is something you touched on as well, is thinking about what can I bring, and I think Addie touched on it as well, is what can I bring to this organisation outside of my skills that I've learned in my qualifications. So for myself, I did IT, I actually studied IT, but I wasn't successful, and to be honest, I wasn't very resilient. So I didn't go into the IT field, and I didn't persist in trying to. So I went into various different other avenues throughout my career. Originally, it was around that sort of mid-2000s, I went transport and logistics, I went into imports and exports, various different other industries, and kind of fell into recruitment. But looking back, it was down to that. It was down to that lack of resilience and persistence, to be honest. And knowing my own personal skills. So it's knowing your skills outside of your technical knowledge of your domain, about you and what you can bring to it. So as Addie touched on, it's what can you bring to that organisation outside of, I know, my certain field. I think approaching how you search as well, thinking about that rather than putting an application in and hoping for the best. It's going above and beyond that to try and get to know the organisation, cater your CV and also your approach and your cover letter, etc., to that role, that specific opportunity. So as Shirley found out, she didn't know enough about institutional banking. So that would have helped her original search and her application at that time if she had done her research, and also directed her application specifically to what she wanted. So I think they're the keys that I would say is know your skills outside of your technical domain. Think about the way you approach it and do your research.
Yeah, and I think you also highlighted another really great point, James, around the career trajectory that you take is not often the one that you plan, and sometimes it can go sideways, and it's only in retrospect that you can really reflect, as Shirley kind of touched on earlier, about the blessings in disguise or the hidden gems in those types of setbacks. Addie, I'm wondering what pieces of advice you would give to the listeners today, really who are job seeking or in the process of starting the job seeking. What's the best strategy from your perspective?
I think that's a really good question, and I think, and I know it sounds really simple, but you've got to have a strategy, and there are. To me, there are probably two very simple questions to ask yourself before you determine that strategy. One is, what is your value proposition? And it can be pretty straightforward. It can be, I've worked for 1 or 2 years. I've got some analytical skills. I want to be able to apply that in an organisation where I can grow. And two, what is your story? Because that becomes important, because you're not just a resume. You are a story that you can actually connect with another individual with. And remember, all organizations are a group of individuals. So when you go and apply for a job, your story should really align with who you are, what you're seeking, and what you can bring to the organization. The third thing, which I think, once you've got those down pat, I think the third thing that's very important to know is basically to map out who you know in various organizations, and think about what is the best way to approach those organizations. So I often get this. I often will get a random LinkedIn ad from someone I don't know, and then I don't get a thoughtful message afterwards. I think about the approach, and your approach will also signal your interpersonal and communication skills as you're doing it. So you want to signal to the employer that very early on that you do have those skills.
Yeah, that's a really great point. And Shelley, I know you have a lot of experience in this regard, working, particularly taking the work that you did as an intern and the skills to kind of create your own opportunities. What advice could you give on to that regard around, particularly there is a couple of pathways for options for people, whether it is applying for existing roles that already exist, looking for opportunities and identifying gaps they can fill in organisations, or creating opportunities of their own, like you did. Perhaps you can reflect on advice you have in that regard.
Yeah, thanks. So I actually had a great story about a recent successful student which got his grad program offer from Deloitte in risk advisory. So he's still doing his final year with Melbourne Uni without permanent residency as an international student from Zimbabwe. So he did a lot of work with us in preparing for the interview, but on top of that, he also met a great mentor, which is a partner from Deloitte, which he met at a Melbourne Uni networking event in his first year. And they've been staying in touch ever since. And he got a lot of great advice and insights from his mentor. And the whole conversation started from him just walking up to this gentleman and introducing himself without knowing that he was a partner. He thought he's just a nice gentleman who was easy to talk with. And I think sometimes when you are not sure about yourself, or when you're overthinking about what can you sell to people, or when you look at networking as a type of some kind of concept that you are after something behind the conversation. But I think you should look at it as naturally connecting with people and asking about their life and show your general interest about who they are and what they do. And I don't think people connect because you just craft a elevator pitch. They connect with you because they share the same value. They probably you being genuine and your passion, and something touch on them because they probably had a similar experience, especially for graduates, because when you reach out to people in the industry with 10 years of experiences, you feel like you don't have that much to offer. And a lot of my students are a bit scared of asking the wrong question. But from my perspective, you just need to put yourself out there, do your research, and list a couple of target companies and really identify those key people who might be able to help you, and be persistent to send out a tailored LinkedIn message. And be aware that 80% of the time you're going to get no response. But for the 20% or even 10% of people who responded, they can be your mentor or even your future manager. And it's a numbers game. It's the same as sending job applications, or when you pitch a client. The more you do it, the better you are at it, and the more likely you're going to get a success. And at the end of the day, you just need one person who really believes in you, who can open up an opportunity. And it can be someone you met before during an event, or it can be your friend who has got a job. And you can map out your circle of influence and the people you have already got a relationship with, and go from there.
Shelley's raised an interesting, she's foreshadowed the next question, which is really around something that a lot of young people dread, and a lot also lean into, and that is the concept of networking. And I'm wondering, James, if you could talk a little bit about how those on the call, the listeners, could think about how they build effective relationships with recruitment agencies or individual companies, or individuals within organisations as well.
Yeah, definitely. And I think there's a lot of things that you touched on already as being that genuine person. A quote I really like is be interested, not interesting. So it's always asking those questions and understanding the other person and being genuine to actually want to understand where they're from, what they did and how they got there. So you can do that through various different mediums. It doesn't have to be in a networking event, which is still daunting to myself these days, even though I do them every single month. Not so much at the moment, but it's something that putting yourself out of that comfort zone to have that conversation, to ask that question, and you can practice in everyday life. So you can get to know the person that you're buying something from in the shop. So you can practice this communication piece. And as Adi said earlier, it is about your story. It's about how you communicate that story, how confidently you say it, how you articulate your story, and genuinely about yourself. So I think connecting with people it's using that genuine opportunity to learn from someone. So Adi, how did you get into your role? How did you become successful in getting? I'm hoping to get into that role within the next few years, but it's also taking that realistic step of understanding an organization that you want to aim to work for, but what you might need to do on the way through as well. So it might not be your ideal role that you studied for straight away. You might take a few steps to get to that point. But if you get into that organization, it doesn't matter what role it is, you could then progress your career and network from within an organization as well. So I think one of the key factors is respect people's time. I think so. If you're building relationships with the organization directly, people individually, or even recruitment agents, it's actually respecting how much time you're utilizing during those conversations and interactions, because we're all busy on both sides of the fence. So I think it's about understanding that, respecting that, and also seeing how you can bring that value. So I think Adi touched on it earlier as well about what you can bring to the table. That's something to think about. It doesn't have to be necessarily, as I said earlier, what you studied. It can be something outside of that. So those relationships is all about honesty, transparency, and that communication piece, I think.
We have a really diverse group of listeners on the call today. I know that we have graduates from arts and science and business degrees, just to name a couple. And we also have not just domestic and international students. So Adi, perhaps you could reflect on some of the challenges that some of those international students may face when they're looking for opportunities from outside of Australia or to stay in Australia. Or how should international job seekers prepare?
Yeah. I might just add on the prior question, because I think Shirley and James mentioned that a lot of people are a little bit nervous about networking and how to approach people and use their time effectively. So what James said is really important, to be honest with your story. And one thing I find is sometimes when you sit down with someone you don't know that well, you get the feeling that they're sitting there to ask you for a favor, and even they feel a little bit anxious that they're there to ask you for something. An easy way to engage someone without feeling like you're asking a favor of a stranger is to one, be really honest with your story and ask them for their thoughts. This is what I'm trying to do. This is how I'm doing it. This is what I'm interested in. What do you think? Do you have any input here? Because people are going to be, that's an easier thing to ask for than, can you put in my resume to XYZ. Anyway, so I digress.
Seek their advice.
Yeah, that's right. I think, I think, in my view, Shirley is clearly the best to comment on this. But my sense, the sense that I get with international students is, because it's hard for me to put myself in their shoes, but I would imagine it must be very frustrating, because
perhaps you put it from the perspective of someone who's worked in multinational companies and kind of seen them come through as well.
Correct. Yes, that's right. I think it's important, and this is a psychological trick that we've all got to do, is to separate the frustration with how we present. I think that's really important to do. And and some of us are conditioned to want, the traditional sort of roles, but that may not be our path. And one way I think is to not focus on necessarily the organization or a traditional path, but to pick a role that enhances the skills that I want to enhance, rather than trying to build a particular resume. So, and I think when you think like that, it actually opens up more doors, more opportunities in your head to pursue than otherwise.
Shirley, we're dying to hear from you and around all the young people you're working with and all the successes that you've had in bringing them into roles in Australia.
Yeah, so I've worked with like hundreds of international students, and myself used to be an international student. I came to Australia when I was 17 years old. So I have to pick up a new language and overcome the like a cultural difference, and sometimes like being the only Asian girl in the room itself requires a lot of like courage and confidence to speak up with, with the mentality that you have something to offer. And I've worked with some amazing students which are high achiever academic-wise, but they forgot to build up their people skill and local experience, because they are so focusing on like getting the H1 and, getting to honors or masters. But from an Australian employer's perspective, I'm sure James can have a lot more insights to add on, but I think people value more relevant experiences and transferable skills more than your qualification. I've got some great students, got their CFA, CPA, FRM sorted, but they still don't know how to sell themselves during the interview, which is a shame because they have spent so much time and they're really intelligent and hardworking. But at the end of the day, people who like us. If you can't like build up the connection with people, you can't tell a good story about who you are and what you can offer, you can't just get a job based on your skills. And skill itself is just a tool until you start create a value for the business. You are either great with people like James, or really good at solving business problems and offer financial advice such as Eddie, or you can be a great digital marketer even if you've got a accounting degree. I think a lot of the students are so limited by their degree and thinking like I got a commerce background and I can only choose within those finance roles. But what if I pick the wrong major? I probably picked the subject because my parents told me to, or probably I just picked accounting because I want to get permanent residency. But a lot of them don't really have that passion for certain career, which is in line with the academic background, which is fine. That is perfectly fine. So I think what it comes really down to is like find your passion, find your calling. You can't really hide or fake your passion. You either got it or not. If you are not interested in the subject you are doing, then look for some other job which will allow you to flourish and spend hours to pick up skill because you're just so interested in itself, no matter whether you got recognized or paid or not. And there are still a lot of experience that they can get by doing virtual internship on Inside Shepherd, for example, or they can just complete courses on Coursera, Udemy to pick up new skills. And there are a lot of things that they can do to build up a strong personal branding by utilizing LinkedIn and actually reach out to people and make sure that you do your research as well. Like every time when I go for an event, if I'm really interested in a guest speaker, I'll look at their LinkedIn and the interview they used to have or the research paper that they published so that I understand who they are and what they're interested in so that I can come up with some insightful question which show that I'm actually interested in them, not just their title or like potentially a referral opportunity. So that's what I would encourage more international students to like get out of their comfort zone. Even if it's during lockdown period, you can still send a warm introduction about yourself on LinkedIn and, get to know what people really do in banking, recruitment, or investment banking, because most of the time people just love the idea of working in certain areas. They don't really understand what kind of job or what kind of skill that's required. So I think that's something they can definitely start doing. while they are still studying or working from home.
We have some, thanks Shirley, we have some questions coming through from the listeners. Before we get there, I think what we've all skirted around and touched on implicitly throughout the call tonight has been around how to set yourself apart, how to stand out. I mean, I'm happy to hear from anyone who has, but that's essentially what you've been talking about, Shirley, is doing that going the extra mile, doing the research, building the rapport. Is there any other reflections that anyone has around how people can really set themselves apart to be stood out, to stand out in the crowd and to get that first role?
I'll jump in. So regards to that, I'd say you can go to the extremes to stand out, which sometimes can go the other way. It can be a detriment to you standing out rather than it being a plus. So there's certain things like Addie said about the story. It's looking at, let's say, that application, if you are, or that message or that connection that you're making, and seeing how you can cater it to that certain individual or that scenario. So like Shirley touched on. But even with your CV and the summary at the top or the cover letter, etc., that puts some personality into it. You can say, I am determined, I'm professional, all these sorts of buzzwords, but you've got to be actually true to that, and it's got to reflect it. I saw a CV recently where initially I wasn't overly keen, I must admit, but I spoke to the person, and after speaking and getting to know them, it was exactly them. Their personality came out from a CV, and it's the first time in 15 years that I've seen that. So that was a really unique scenario. Initially, yes, I was put off a little bit because it stood out. It wasn't the traditional. But because us on this side of the fence, and I'm sure many organisations out there are going to be exactly the same, they want to give you the benefit of the doubt. So they will look at that, they'll read it, and they'll consider that. And then when they connect with you, they might match that up and go, that's fantastic. So it doesn't have to be a video interview, a video CV, or all of these sorts of fancy things that you see out there. It could be, but that's where you've just got to make it right for the right audience. So with a PwC, a Deloitte, a Deutsche Bank or something like that, I'm not sure if a video CV would work as well. But if it is a digital startup or something along those lines, I'm pretty sure it would. So cater that to the organisation that you're aiming to speak to and connect with, and the individual. I think that's my probably added points there.
Great. So we've got some questions coming through. Addie, I might start with you. You mentioned random people reaching out to you on LinkedIn. Is it generally accepted by professionals if accompanied by a personal message, or how well received is it?
I'd say it just depends on the message, really. So as I said before, this is the first time you're reaching out to this individual in the organisation, or maybe the first time you're reaching out to the organisation itself. So a bit of thought in the message is really important, and I think, as we've all been talking about, authenticity is also really important. So and being honest about why you're reaching out. So I'm XYZ, this is my background, I'd be interested to know your thoughts on XYZ, and that kind of puts someone at ease as to why a quote unquote random is reaching out to them. Most people are very happy to help out others where they can, as long as they don't feel like they're overreaching.
Yeah. Shirley, we've got a question here from a student. How do I get a role that requires experience when I don't have any?
It's an interesting question, because I think sometimes people interpret experience too rigidly. They think they need to get a title, get paid for a job in order to get experience. Actually, you can create your own project. Like if you are really interested in certain area, you can come up with a topic and start interviewing like 10 top performers in that industry through reaching out to them on LinkedIn and send them like the research pack that you created. Or you can start, like one of my clients, recently, I set up a project for him to complete 8 virtual internships on Inside Shepherd. And every time after he complete internship, he'll put a review on LinkedIn and comment on his experience and whether there is something that could have improved. And the second post got liked by the co-founder of Inside Shepherd. And they asked the IT team to send him a personal message to ask for his feedback. And by doing that, he has already got 8 different project experiences on his CV. From my perspective, it doesn't really matter if it's a virtual internship or whether it's a formal job, as long as you have put your skills into practice and get feedback. So and don't overlook the skills that you got from your student society experiences, your volunteering. There's some really valuable teamwork and leadership skill you can develop from there. Or if you're really passionate about marketing and video editing, you can create your own YouTube channel to start putting those things into practice. If you have already got 1 million followers, I'll be dying for hiring someone like that as an employer. So I think there are still a lot of things they can start building up without getting a formal job as such.
And James, I have a double barrel question for you, which really does dovetail on what Shelley's just spoken about. Apart from online searches, what are the other ways that people can look for jobs during these tough times? And someone's also specifically asked whether you talked about researching roles in companies, but sometimes positions are advertised anonymously. How can you prepare in that situation?
I think LinkedIn is a tool that we utilize. So it's an unwritten secret, which isn't clearly a secret for us recruitment consultants, because it is the wealth of a lot of knowledge. So you can look at an organization, you can look at people who work within that organization, people who used to work in that organization, people who used to work in that role. So you can actually look at their backgrounds. So you can have a look at those similar backgrounds, etc., and try and extrapolate information from there to see what that employer might be looking for or might be beneficial to talk about as well. I think outside of social and online, etc., through word of mouth and, again, networking events, as Shirley mentioned earlier, and events in general, I think those sorts of, or potentially creating that opportunity. So if you have something of value, if you've done a paper on a certain organisation, why not approach that organisation to discuss what you found in your findings, etc.? That might open up another avenue of communication as well. So as we talked about earlier, of that circle of influence, it is leveraging that not in a disrespectful way, but in a positive way of how you can get to know your friends and their networks and the businesses that they work for. And then also other people through those platforms. So I do think that LinkedIn is a very strong platform for a lot of research in relation to preparation for organisations and also discussions with people. So you may not know who you're going to meet through that process, but you can assume. You can assume that the first initial stages are going to be with recruitment or HR. You can assume that the next person will be the manager or senior leader within that space of what you're applying to. Or a peer or someone who works within those teams. Would you add to that, guys? Would you add anything else to that?
Yeah, if I can just add to that, I agree. LinkedIn has been a very useful tool for myself as well. I mean, just personally, James, one of the things you recommended, I've found myself actually doing whereby before approaching an organisation, or in the midst of speaking to an organisation, I would find someone who has previously worked there, because I know they're going to give me their honest views, and also at the same time, amidst speaking to an organisation, just going and having a coffee with someone I know there who's not part of the process. One, it signals your interest, and you can speak in a very relaxed way, and the reality is that most professional organisations, that stuff does get fed back through in a positive way. So I think that's that's one tool you can really use. Just one more thing to add to that is just think about how to build your nodes, and LinkedIn is a tool that can actually help you to do that. And one thing I think people shouldn't be afraid of doing is asking for introductions, because if you've met someone and you've connected with them, they have in some ways, they've given you their backing, and they will be happy to introduce you to someone else, and that actually puts you forth to another node in the system, and that will only advantage you.
I think we're in strange times within the COVID period. So I was wondering if we could offer some specific advice around networking online and building rapport when you can't actually meet in person. Shirley, perhaps you have some reflections.
I think there are a couple of things people can start doing. First of all, like start attending virtual meetup groups. Like I know there are a lot of meetup groups around like data analytics, banking, like, you know, across different industries, you name it. So after you have joined the event and actually had some kind of conversation or understanding about a certain person, and send them a follow-up message by saying like, I really love your speech, I resonate with your experience, and I have a couple of follow-up questions that I'd really like to seek advice from you. Can I, you know, grab a virtual coffee for 20 minutes? Just to be specific about what you want to talk to people about, rather than like, you know, I just like to have a general chat, I'm a graduate, I'm feeling a bit lost, I'm struggling with finding a job. Like, people don't give you a job because they feel sorry for you. You need to really demonstrate that you have something to offer and be specific about the type of question and make sure that's something people will also be interested in. And I think a lot of people fail to understand the importance of follow up, because after you have met someone and have a great like first conversation with them, you need to follow up with an email by thank them for their time and recap on the advice that you have received. And most importantly, take down some action items and put a time frame next to it. So 3 months later, after you have done your virtual internship or finished that book they recommended, you can give them an update about, hey, this is my progress, I really appreciate your help. And that's how you bring people along the journey. And don't just like bluntly ask them for a job referral the first time you met someone. Make sure you have at least had 3 deep conversation, or you feel like you have connected with this person for 2 to 3 months before you actually ask them for a big favor. Because at the end of the day, if they're gonna put down their professional reputation on the line to refer you a job, they need to know you very well. And you need to put in effort to demonstrate that you appreciate their time and you take on their advice to build on your skill set. So you won't embarrass yourself by asking someone to recommend your job.
We have time for just 1 or 2 more questions. So I'll give a quick one for James and then we'll go to the finals. James, we've got a question here around what are the biggest red flags that you see in CVs, that pitfalls that perhaps people should avoid?
Interesting one, because you could probably go to 12 different people and get 12 different pieces of advice. I think the structure is key. So short introduction, profile at the top, etc., education underneath that, and then chronological order from most recent backwards is probably traditional. References, I necessarily wouldn't put them on there. Red flags specifically, to me, that's a good question. You put me on the spot here, but I would say probably that fine balance of too many buzzwords, the too much copying, pasting, or even catering towards an exact role, saying the exact things, I think is another thing. It stands out quite a lot, actually. And then not being quite generic and not having enough information. I think key achievements is also within a role. As much as you want to hear that James has been a recruitment consultant, you'd actually like to hear that James is a specialist recruitment consultant and has been one of the top performers, let's say, or an award winner. Those sorts of key achievements make you stand out from someone else. So if you're looking at your peers, how can you stand out slightly? So those key achievements, I think, is a great aspect within a CV, because I think the average time they say that a person looks at a CV is 10 seconds. So what you need in those 10 seconds is those kind of eye-catching pieces that they're going to look at quite quickly. So how does Addy stand out? Let me look at his achievements at Deutsche Bank. Okay, great. He's going to be one of the top performers because he's won XYZ awards. I think they're the key things I would say.
And just one more question for Addy and Shirley, I'll throw to you both. What is one thing that you wish you would have done as a fresh job seeker, or when you're making a transition to a job? So I guess it's a final piece of advice that you would give to your younger self. Shirley, we'll start with you.
All right, I'll definitely have a chat with someone who's in institutional banking, preferably in ANZ, and understand where my gap is and understand what they like and dislike about their job. So I'm prepared and know exactly what I'm going for.
Paddy?
Yeah, I would almost map out your own, like, 1 to 2 month plan in terms of, you're getting there. Just be a sponge and absorb initially, but have just set in your own kind of checkpoints with your mentor or your manager to see how you're going, and to just make sure that you're on the right track. And I think the other thing is, you're not going to know everything in the first little while. Your attitude and your thoughtfulness is what's going to stand out initially.
And any final thoughts from you, James, reflections from the discussion tonight, or pieces of advice you could offer those on the webinar?
Yeah, I think be open-minded. I think be open-minded to what the role entails and what you will learn from it. So someone may not initially think that a customer service role would add value to their accounting degree, or they want to be an accountant. But as an accountant, you've got to build strong relationships, and you've got to be able to communicate and have excellent customer service. So yes, that would be an excellent opportunity to get into an organisation that you believe to be reputable. So I think, mine was a bit of a different pathway, where I just kind of took what was in front of me at the time, which led me to a great career. So just be open-minded to where it can lead you. Learn something new every day from someone new every day. That's what I always say as well.
I completely agree with what James just said. And there's actually a saying I really love about, which is a career is a marathon, not a sprint. So you don't need to just focus on whether you've got the best job in the world when you just graduate, because you've got another 20 to 30 years to build up your career, as long as you can get transferable skills and improve yourself and take one step at a time towards your goal. So I think that is absolutely essential for graduates this year, because you are facing some tough competition. I know that might be people who are 5 years or 10 years older than you, got way more experiences competing with you in the same interview room, and that's intimidating. It's tough, but as long as you understand what's your next role, preferably what is your next 2 roles, so you can work backwards and thinking, what are the skills, what are the experiences I need to get so that I can be competent enough to perform my second next job in another 3 to 5 years. And you get there. Yeah, so not everyone can completely understand what they want to do when they first graduate. It took me a while to figure out where my passion and where my true calling is. But when I look back, all those years of working in the bank actually taught me a lot about how to manage a business and how to build up relationship with people at a professional level. So don't discount the experiences you build up, even if you haven't quite reached your dream goal yet. And you'll get there one day, as long as you are persistent.
That sounds like an excellent note to end on. So we might move on just to concluding, to wrap up. There are more Ask Alumni live sessions in the coming months, which you can tune into. So in August, we'll be presenting 2 sessions. Our upcoming session on upskilling will be hosted at the beginning of August. And following that, there'll be a session highlighting career insights and resources in healthcare, which will take place on August 19. So keep an eye out on your inboxes for further details. Before we finish, I also wanted to encourage all of you to consider sharing your own insights from your career journey so far with our current students through the Ask Alumni mentoring program. Our online platform allows students to reach out to alumni to have one-off 30-minute conversations over the phone, by video conference, or in person. So this is a convenient way for anyone around the world to become a mentor. Your advice and support can help give current students the best start in their career. Also, don't miss out on the chance to build your skills, knowledge and abilities with the University of Melbourne's wide range of professional education and development opportunities. With micro certs and short courses, there are study options tailored for your professional needs, and these courses are designed to be flexible and fit around your already busy work schedule. Addie, Shirley and James, it has been fascinating to talk to each of you and to learn more about your careers and experiences tonight. And on behalf of all those who have participated in this event, I wanted to offer my sincere thanks to you for giving up your time to share your insights and advice. Until next time, goodbye everyone, and best wishes in your career journeys.